Good old boys.
I'm Mark.
Bog beef. Today we have special guests. We've talked about him on several episodes. We have Dave, the Distributist, with us.
How's it going?
YouTube creator. You write some.
He's a public intellectual.
Internet public intellectual. I think that term's become probably very degraded by these days.
I've recommended your stuff to a lot of people. You've had some really awesome predictions. I just thought of one the other day. Also, you've debated many people, a lot of our listeners have heard of. You've debated ContraPoints.
Sargon, right?
Oh, yeah. I remember Well, yeah, that's... it's been such a long time that, you kind of forget these things even happened, right?
Kind of forget that guy existed.
Yeah, well, how could you ever forget ContraPoints?
No, I meant Sargon. Yeah.
Oh, well, I guess Sargon has ceased to make content that interests me, but apparently he's doing very well. Sargon's essentially becoming the new mainstream right wing. It's basically like William F. Buckley, minus classical music and plus video games and Dungeons and Dragons and...
It's the most horrible thing I've ever heard.
Well, that seems what's going on, right?
Yeah.
A lot of beating off and frog memes, basically. I just thought of one the other day where you were debating Templar. It was a right wing guy. This was before Charlottesville went down, maybe a year before.
Well, was this my first video where I was talking to Argent Templar?
Yeah.
Well, that was odd because, that was so much has changed since then. Because, I was someone who was very skeptical of the alt-right phenomenon, but I was open to, but I was also very skeptical of reaction. And in the period between when I had that interview and when my channel came into my own, just a whole ton of things started happening that made me think okay, we need a broader explanation of how politics works in this country, and my conservative take is just not working here.
I think we could talk about that because I don't think you can't really ignore people like Mencius Moldbug and stuff anymore. But
no, yeah, it's impossible, right?
Because main thing, when you have a guy writing in 2008 and he's calling stuff and it happens before your eyes, you're like, okay, he might have a method to it. But I remember in that debate you were talking about the alt-right, and this was at the point where there was this perception, there were kids horsing around, whatever, and you told the guy, you said if the progressives think that this is a real problem for them, they will destroy them. Yeah. And Arjun was like, "What are you talking about? This is kids online. They're posting memes and stuff. That's ridiculous. They're not going to even take notice." And then 6 months later, we're just they're gone. It doesn't exist. They're vaporized. That was a good one. Just a particular example of
Well, I think the thing is that, I know that Moldbug himself has talked about this, right? It's very hard to discern between LARPing and irony. There's almost, visually there's almost no difference between the two of them, right? And the thing is that irony is really the only way that you can react to the utter failure of the cathedral's narrative. And because of that, there was this great opportunity that opened up for the cathedral to basically create a new narrative for itself. And the new narrative for itself is, we're the ones who protect you from the new rise of Adolf Hitler. And look, these young video game playing guys on the internet are the new rise of Hitler. And so that was, it was incredibly useful for the mainstream in a lot of ways. And I think that, I'm not so sure that could have been necessarily avoided. You can't stop people from doing this, but it was kind of foreseeable. I think it was a disaster that, a lot of people could see coming.
Do you think they destroyed them because they were an actual threat, or because they were just they were angry about the Trump election?
Well, I don't think that the real people. So when we say the cathedral, we mean the consensus of the academy and sort of the unelected government, the sort of bureaucrats and Hollywood and the media. I don't think anybody with two brain cells to rub together actually thought that Richard Spencer was a threat to the apparatus of the United States. The crumbling of the mainstream narrative is, right? But I don't think that they were sophisticated enough to understand that, right?
Moldbug had a good one in his blog where he was he was arguing with someone about, the right has this fantasy about, well, if things get too bad, we'll just have, we have all the guns, we'll just have a revolution. And he points out that if you look at Germany in the 20s and 30s, the court system, it went very easy on the right because they had pretty much had political sympathies with those people. If you were Richard Spencer or Based Stickman or whoever those crazy people are, if you're trying to fight in the streets with Antifa or, God forbid, the police, you're facing the opposite situation. The court system's going to go ham on you, and it's going to let the people you're fighting off with a slap on them. I mean, the guy who hit somebody with a bike lock, he got pretty much no punishment for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the whole thing with this perspective. I mean, Charlottesville was kind of an indication that the cathedral just had to kind of like call in a few favors, and they could completely decapitate what people understood as the mainstream leadership of the alt-right. I mean, it was like 2 days, and like all of a sudden, like half the leadership of the alt-right was like ratting out the other half. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, right?
I live very close to Charlottesville, like 30 minutes away, and when that happened, a lot of people had never heard of Antifa, and Antifa kind of took on this reputation for the locals as like Al Qaeda. People in mass are running around doing. You wouldn't know that from the media narrative, and of course, this is a very southern rural area, but a lot of people were introduced to these weird, radical, extremely online ideologies. Like my dad called me the next day. Is like, "Have you ever heard of Antifa?"
I mean, but Antifa works because they're the little playthings of the actual establishment, right? And the reason why Portland Antifa can run around and do their shenanigans and break windows and hit Andy No over the head with I don't know what they threw at him, but it was something heavy because he was bleeding out of his skull. The reason why they can do that is because the mayor of Portland, and this is something that should be sort of unexplainable from a normie con perspective, the mayor of Portland, Oregon, like, thinks that they're his guys, like they're just kids, so okay, let them assault people. It's not a big deal. But if you threw a punch at Charlottesville, the FBI arrested you, charges were brought up for you in Virginia, and so you had people in California who had gone to that conference, had gone to that demonstration, and they were hauled back and they were charged and given jail time and/or probation.
Richard Spencer looks good on CNN, though, don't he?
Yeah, and of course, Richard Spencer being like every 1980s movie villain. I mean, it was an operation that was so easy to sort of incorporate into the pre-existing narrative of the cathedral. I mean, like, here are every movie villain you've ever seen. And they're coming to your locale unless the left comes to save you. And to think of how on the rocks the narrative was in 2016 after the flop of Obama's last year, to get that kind of breath of fresh air. I mean, I don't think they're going to be able to lean on the alt-right or Hitler reincarnated coming to get you indefinitely, but it definitely helped them a lot.
I know the right's not going to be able to put together too many movements when you are making moves like getting all these young guys to show up to these things, and people, they took everybody's picture there.
Yeah.
These guys are screwed. I mean, and at their age, I don't know. I don't care about let's not talk about whether they understood what they were doing, whatever. But I know they're probably not going to go to any more. They're not going to be listening to people that do this, that are advocate these kind of things anymore.
There are people who do nothing pretty much in their lives but monitor people they call right-wing Nazis, whatever. There's one in Charlottesville. She now has a career from Patreon out of spying on people. She goes to the Charlottesville town council meetings like she's undercover at the Nuremberg rally. And if you know anything about how boring Charlottesville is.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. But she went to the 2A rally in Richmond and pointed her camera at people, and then as Bogby said before, Jared Holt. This is all they do. Can you think of anyone on the right in that situation?
This is the thing. I mean, the left has had years of facilitating activist efforts, and the right simply has not. And so the left is just prepared to do this kind of thing. I mean, I guess we could argue over whether it's something that could even be done by the right? Like, would this even be allowed? But it just, I mean, this is sort of consistently the problem of the right, is they see the superficial result of the 60s. Like, what's the superficial result of the 60s? Well, it's a bunch of, like, kind of crazy, kind of sort of violent, confused college students making a big ruckus. And what happens? Like, they get what they want. So, okay, what does that mean? That means if we make a big ruckus with a bunch of, like, angry, uneducated, sloppy kids, then we'll get what we want. But it doesn't work that way. The reason why the protesters in the 60s got what they wanted is, again, because they represented a certain very powerful and connected section of the media elite, of the governmental elite, of the academy. And because of that, it was basically the protester was just an excuse to go forward with that. So much bad right-wing thought has been sort of captured by this idea that we can copy pasta, the left's playbook, and have this work in any way. It really obviously doesn't, right? Yeah. It doesn't at all. And I think that this is something that people are slowly coming to terms with. I don't think you're going to see another far-right rally like Charlottesville really within our lifetimes ever. Nor do I think that would ever really bear fruit at all.
You just saw one in Richmond, and that should be the model.
Well, but what did that accomplish, though, ultimately, right? Like, I mean, and there's two outcomes, right? Like, the first, what did happen was the best case outcome, right? A bunch of good guys with guns, and I support gun ownership rights generally. They go and they march around, and there's a lot of media cameras there, and then they clean up their own trash and they leave. And no one's convinced by them marching around. Nobody is dissuaded from them marching around. The debate more or less stands where it is, and I don't know. I guess they feel better about themselves or something like that. I mean, I think that's, it's good that they came out and gave the effort, but I don't think anything was accomplished. But if anything had gone wrong in that, if like an Antifa had like thrown a bomb at a guy and the guy unloaded with a gun, right? Like, and like winged him, like that would have massively hurt the reaction against the Virginia, I don't know, what would you call it, gun confiscation or gun control or whatever. Yeah. It would have massively hurt that movement. And so it was sort of this weird, like, heads I win, tails you lose for the anti-gun side of that debate. It was very hard to imagine anything positive coming out of that. I know that the law is unpopular among segments of the Virginia population. But it just felt like it was this huge liability with no real upside.
Well, I have an opinion about that. And
sure, go ahead. Yeah, William.
Again, I live in Rockingham County, Virginia. A lot of the Gen X, boomers, even some millennial people who were not very, I don't want to say engaged in politics because I don't think that's necessarily even a good thing to be engaged in politics, but they didn't really think about what's happening. And this 2A movement has spurred some people asking questions to themselves, like I said, not necessarily politically, but just morally, and what direction is society going in? Yeah. But, like...
I mean, Drag Queen Story Hour wasn't quite enough, I guess,
yeah, honestly.
Really?
I remember when that happened the first time, that was the thing that I think, that was like the red pill for me. I saw this happening, and I was politically left at that point. Mm-hmm. Now, not socially, but I was along with the economic platform.
Yeah.
And all these people around me who fellow travelers were like, "Oh, this is fine," and I didn't agree at all. But what really got me was I said, "Why is this necessary? Why do we have to? Why should drag queens be reading stories to children?" Yeah. And they explained to me very patiently, because I'm not I was being very stupid about this. Well, you understand, this is a cultural thing. This is part of a very big part of LGBT culture. It's not a sexual thing. It's like a sacred dance for Native Americans. You just can't. And it was at that point I realized, wow, we are actually in a lot of trouble.
Well, this is actually amazing. You mentioned this because it kind of underlies like a lot of the mistakes people make. People, I think, perhaps in your position or perhaps in people's position, they think like, okay, like economics is the thing, right? I mean, that's where actually the rubber hits the road. But there's sort of a bigger question. If you're going to, say, democratize or move a lot of money into the government from the private sector, the immediate question then is who controls the government and who decides how this is being allocated? And very obviously, inside the culture war, more than just being degenerate or silly or stupid, or even just outright immoral in some cases, what the culture war is setting up implicitly is an environment where it's virtually impossible. The rules and regulations around speaking and making your voice heard make it very, very unlikely that people who come from rural southern areas are actually going to have an equal voice to people who come from, well, ethnicities that are more represented in urban areas and that are more represented in the Ivy Leagues. And half of this stuff is either implicitly in the case of Drag Queen Story Hour, right? If you're against Drag Queen Story Hour, you are a transphobe, and transphobes can't speak. You're now excluded from, well, even perhaps other conversations. I mean, great example is Buck. I mean, there's trans people Buck Angel is a trans person who's considered transphobic, and he's not allowed to do anything in the movement. It's really funny. It's really funny. I can't. It's amazing how fast it moves. But you can get excluded for really any reason. You are kind of depersoned. Charles Murray is another great example. Because he has this opinion, he can't tell you why, there's an amphetamine crisis in the white community because he wrote a book about race in the early 90s. And this is, you realize that the culture war in many ways is a main lever for people to operate power, especially if more power enters into the government proper, as it will be if we start massively socializing things. So we could argue about like the need for having certain industries or certain sections of the healthcare a market being nationalized, but all that does is kick off a larger conversation about who controls the boundaries of these things and what kind of conversations are we allowed to have or not allowed to have.
Right after Trump's election, I was still or maybe it was before, I was still kind of on board with the economic side, and I would argue with people who were socialists, social democrats. I would say, look, we're allies here. You want the same thing I want economically. Socially, we disagree. So why don't we'll push aside those arguments. We won't talk about abortions and stuff. We'll be agnostic about that. And
that's always like the phony baloney olive branch, isn't it?
They were like, oh, absolutely not. You can't do that. A reporter who has had bylines and doesn't matter. She told me that being pro-abortion, pro-choice, in her words, was an absolute crucial aspect of socialism. You cannot be a socialist and be anti. And I was like, well, are you saying Hugo Chavez wasn't a socialist? Like Hillary Clinton's more of a socialist than him? She's like, oh yeah, absolutely.
Intersectionality. But it's important to understand that this is a feature, not a bug, of what we call socialism, quote unquote, right? Like, this isn't like just some weird thing that happened. Socialism, as it's been practiced by the elites, has always been a project to essentially put the working class at the behest of what reactionaries call the cathedral. It doesn't work otherwise. And that's just sort of the crucial, it's really crucial to understand in all of this.
It's interesting that sometimes they talk about about how all their policies are creating like this utopia, and in some instances, check this out. So if you live in an urban environment, you get a nice bureaucratic job, or not even a nice bureaucratic job. You're pretty low down the totem pole. Let's say you make $75,000 in not something lower than San Francisco, right? So something a little bit normal. We'll say you make 70 grand, even 60 grand. You're making 60 grand. You're in a metro area. You've got your food, your groceries, your laundry is delivered to you like you're Louis the 14th by slave labor. That you don't even have to. You can hit a button on the app so that the person who brings your stuff to you won't look at you. Like they'll just leave it at the door.
Yeah.
There are people winning. Sometimes I hear them talking and they're like, "Oh no, this is great. You're going to grow the economy." You think, Bloomberg was saying, "Look at how cheap the consumer goods and services are. This is awesome. What do you want to do?"
Bernard says that now.
That's a sore subject around here, as you might imagine.
He came out and said, "Hey, the price of food would go up if we did that." Unbelievable.
I wanted to flip around. So we're talking about the ways that the right is not well poised. But one thing Mulbug did theorize back then in the letter to Young Contrarian, where he said, so this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. The bureaucracy is going to kill you. Bureaucracy is going to kill you. He did make some mention. He's like, over at that Federalist Society, they could do something. Lawfare courts, that seems prescient too. That does seem like that's the there's a lot of conservatives that told me this election, they're like, I could give a rat's ass about Trump, but I have to vote for him because he's going to be able to appoint judges.
Yeah, that is a kind of critical flaw in the cathedral's sort of master plan. It's not a conspiracy. I'm just using it euphemistically. Is they're very vulnerable to attacks in the court, right? Like if the court turns against them, they don't really know exactly what to do with that. And I think this is something that I don't know. I think there's a lot of this is a good way to slow them down. It's not a way to indefinitely hold back this progress, though, and that needs to be understood, right?
The shot callers of the cathedral, we're talking about this new left, people like Mark Hughes, people like Steinem laying this shit out while they're on the CIA payroll, by the way. Mm-hmm. But they weren't from team government, they were from team university. University is a huge part of this. We have this new thing, this coronavirus coming around. As you know, Chinese students are pay like, I just found out in Australia they pay 5 times the normal tuition. A lot of these schools, they tell the professors, look.
Oh, they're cash cows.
Yeah, they said you can't fail them because if they're not here, the lights are going off.
Yeah. Now
there's a couple of universities that said we're not going to get our Chinese students back by April 1st, and we don't know what to do. Do you think this?
They're already reducing hiring at some schools. Like this.
Yeah,
in the United States,
it's a problem. I mean, they're.
Is this a black swan event for the universities, possibly?
I wish. I mean,
they have so much money in endowment.
Yeah, I think that they're not going in. I mean, they're not going. It's going to be a problem for them, I guess. I don't know if it's going to be something that's super. It's definitely not an extinction level event, right? I mean, they know how to deal with minor disruptions in labor, which is what this is, right? Their cheap labor is going bye-bye. And they're going to have to come up with a new plan. I think that they'll be able to do that. It's not usually hard to find cheap labor in 21st century reality. I wish it was harder.
We should talk about Oxford. So I have a friend who's in the academy. They were telling me that classics enrollment is way down. We've had this story come out here. This is sort of this was a big note in 2018 with that WAPO article. So here we are in 2020. Oxford has announced they want to have a conversation about dropping Homer from the classics.
Not just Homer, Virgil too.
Oh yeah.
No, like everything, right?
Yeah.
Now, all your basic bitch conservatives are like Spiked Online, Nanny Review.
They're running a brick, right?
Oh, we're going to lose Western civilization. It's not going to be the 1950s anymore if this happens.
I mean, there may be some kind of cultural revolution going on, guys. I mean, just maybe like if this happens, this will be the final straw. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's kind of silly at this stage. I mean, the question is, how could anyone not see this coming? It's kind of silly at this stage, right? They should have expected this. They should have expected this for years, and they should have told people, like, look, this is what you're going to get, right? You're going to get
bell hooks. Yeah,
you're going to get bell hooks as the new Western canon, and now bell hooks is the new Western canon.
This isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way.
It's a huge opportunity for the distant right.
Right. Well, for anybody who's not an insane person, if you subscribe to the bunker theory that we have to, like, that's mine, which is that we have to build a bunker and protect the things that you need to continue society once you lose control of the political power, the culture, media, because that's already happened.
Well, definitely some form of separatism or parallelism is needed. I mean, the problem also with some right-wing things is, bunkers, the problem with bunkers or literal bunkers or figurative ones is that bunkers don't grow very much.
Yeah.
Right? So unless there's a disaster and you put your money in a bunker, you're going to lose your money, right? And so that's a huge problem because if you prep and nothing happens, then you've lost out on a lot of opportunities. And I think that I would prefer something that looked more along the lines of, okay, we need to come up with a way of kind of growing outside the mainstream, right? Not necessarily holding up, but providing an alternative in plain view, and then kind of daring them to kind of take that down, right?
Well, in this case, they're handing it to anybody who wants it. Homer, Virgil.
I mean, you say Oxford is, they're de-emphasizing this, but I mean, I think Yale's almost gone. It's completely gutted their classics program, and Yale was known as a college that their classics program was renowned worldwide. So now we can safely say that classics in the university is truly on its last legs. This is the last generation where classics exist in the university. Outside of a few holdouts like St. John's College and these Hillsdale colleges where the whole point is to be retro, right? But now in the mainstay of large research institutions, classic studies is effectively dead. So what fills the gap? And so we're going to have a generation of thinkers that doesn't know this stuff and doesn't feel like they even have to.
Well, I like to throw this out there. Today or yesterday, the YouTube guy PewDiePie, he's like the most popular guy on YouTube. Everyone under the age of 17 watches PewDiePie. He did a video about Diogenes today.
Oh yeah, really?
So I mean, this is the thing now. This is the problem for, if you want to call it the cathedral, whatever. They don't have control over. Complete control over the information. It's not, it's not 12-15. They can't decide what you read about. Now, I could see envision a future where that's not true, but for the moment, this is something that's available to people. Mm-hmm. Them throwing it in the gutter.
I don't think that if the cathedral had a mother brain, it would not want to do this. Even when I was totally, even at my most Marxist, I quickly realized so I don't have a degree in one of these things or whatever. So it's you try to come up with clever points, like you outsmart them, here I found this thing, that contradicts what the all this id poll bullshit and stuff. And the problem is if you're not they define what the answers are.
Yeah, they define what counts and what doesn't, right?
Right.
So you can't outsmart them by finding there's no rule in Marxism that's respected, right? That's not how the thing works.
With this, you have people like Jeet here, and that motherfucker, he will do shit he's engaging you, and he's shitting all. He's he's shitting all over, let's say the classics in this case. He will do this move where he will troll you, and he'll be like, no, this is all trash. It's all totally garbage. I should know because, I went to an Ivy League school. I sat on the quad reading Chaucer. And
of course, right?
Yeah. And they're in charge of it. Before we went live here, I said I would take a gander. Let's take a dab a little spit on my finger, stick it in the air, and see what's going on with the classics. Mm-hmm. I checked out my local state institution. I checked out an Ivy League institution. Mm-hmm. I went to the state institution. You click on all the professors, and you can see what they're doing, what they're publishing. 110% of it. It was all just like, well, here's some of the things you can learn in my local state institution classics department. You can learn about abortion in the ancient world. You can learn about clinical gynecology in Aristotle. Women's bodies in classical Greek science.
That's a keeper.
Roman, lesbian, and gay studies. So, like, all this is like, I like war and violence studies. I like that. Even if I was like some big woke tard, like this would be like second rate. Like, you guys are amateurs. Like, you're not even the real thing, and you're just playing it. So I checked in with a friend at Ivy League. They said, "Oh yeah." They said, "Yeah, even if you don't like it, their enrollment is through the floor, and they believe." This is what I was told. They believe that by doing all this woke shit, they can make a desperate plea to keep their departments.
They're probably right. It's a business now, and part of the business is training up new clergy. And this is a way. Hey, if you told me, yesterday that this is a person who's a PhD in classics, I would have been impressed. I would be like, oh wow, this person probably can read Homer back and forth. But in the future, maybe it will mean this. It means that you studied that Roman herb that was in North Africa that would let you have abortions, and that was sexual relations and the Roman Empire.
They're so ugly about it. They just say, oh,
it's
here's
cynical,
a thing,
right? It's cynical. That's what.
Here's a thing that says you shouldn't vote for Trump. Just use a little bit of effort. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, so the critical thing to understand about all this intersectionality stuff, and it's almost, people say like cultural Marxism, the Frankfurt School. It's not even that it's really. And the Frankfurt School had a certain coherency, and it had a certain coherency to it. It's intellectual stuff. The important thing to understand is that this thing is radically cynical and radically anti-intellectual. Once you understand that these perspectives like intersectionality, they're not some kind of system of rules that you can lawyer. They're not some kind of operating view of the world that you can examine and find your little niche in, right? They're systems that have designated winners and losers. And regardless of whether you operate inside their assumptions or whether you don't, if you try to mess with who's the designated winner and who's the designated loser, you will get absolutely pushed back on. There's no way a Southern white male can go into intersectionality and get anything that will ever allow him to correct a point on one of the protected groups inside a conversation in an intellectual space. That is not allowed to happen narratively. And it's more than anything else a narrative structure. The pretension of being, it does have roots in these Frankfurt School people. That is a definite, you can go back in the bibliographies and trace back the sources. The idea that cultural Marxism or the Frankfurt School is a myth is, it's a myth put forward by BreadTube trying to target people who can't read bibliography sections of academic papers. You can see that the fingerprints, but that's almost the least important thing about it, right? Adorno and Marcuse and Lyotard and all these people, those were actually intellectual things you could grapple with. As it exists in the current environment, it absolutely is not. It is only a narrative, and it is the most cynical and bald-faced narrative you could possibly imagine.
It would function worse if it required, like, I tried to read Marcuse, and it was above me.
It was beneath you. Yeah, I remember when you were reading it. There was no point where you were like, I don't understand what this guy's saying.
No, I hated it, but that's not the point. Kimberly Crenshaw and Bell Hooks. It's better for them to be easier to, I'll say understand, but it's better for them to be simpler.
Yeah,
because,
I mean, bell hooks is like 4th grade reading level, easy.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to have any substantial experience with philosophy whatsoever to read bell hooks. I mean, the amount of intellectual background you need to do it is minimal, absolutely minimal.
It's funny because there's probably a lot of people on the anti-woke left or the class reductionist left that would probably agree with that if they were allowed to.
Yeah, but they're not. And that's the critical thing, right? I mean, the anti-woke left, and this is why I don't think BreadTube's going anywhere. They're eventually going to have to confront the supreme anti-intellectual nature of the mainstream left, but they can't confront it. They can't say that's bullshit. Whereas, I can stand on one leg all day and criticize David French or National Review and call them shills. I mean, that's the whole groper phenomenon, right? You're never gonna get class reductionist leftists groyping bell hooks. That will never happen. And it's important to understand why it will never happen. And the reason why it will never happen is that at its core, the left as it exists is simply a narrative devoid of any formal intellectual framework whatsoever. That's the important thing to understand about the left as it exists.
What you're saying is absolutely true. It's insane. The anti-id poll left or whatever. Ironically, it's way more non-white, way more quote unquote diverse, and you're just eating shit from like rich white people went to Yale, whatever. But obviously, it doesn't matter. It's the rules of the game and stuff. But I lost it.
You're on to something.
No, I think you have something here that I need to know, and I damn it, I forgot it.
Well, I mean, it's just. I think that it's obviously that we know that IdPol has the money, right?
Right.
I mean, that's sort of the critical thing to realize about all of this, right? The reason why they're successful is they have the money, and the class reductionists don't. The class reductionists also have rich enemies.
I remember it. Okay, so this is me. I need to learn something here. So you'll be in an engagement or like a post engagement where you're eating shit from the IdPol people, whatever. There's a lot of very, very smart people in the anti-IdPol left people, and they're very well read. And Marxist literature, it goes on for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. There's a lot of very brilliant stuff in there. And you can find like a description, like someone just sort of laying out the bullshit that they're doing that's written in like 1909 or whatever, right? Some guy in 1909 says this is what professional managerial class people do, and they're doing it because they're in a class position, blah, blah, blah. And people, they'll read that and they'll say, look at that. Some guy in the Communist Party in 1909 already knew what they were going to do. And that's it. That just supposed to make you feel good, but then you still got your ass kicked.
Yeah.
It goes a lot further back than that. And that's one of the things when we talk about the classics department being destroyed. Okay, I have been mulling around this idea about, I don't want to say the left, but we'll just say, to be argumentative, we'll say the left.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely the left.
No, it's a tricky thing with Yeah.
All right, I was thinking about Clodius, the Roman. Clodius was a patrician who got the priest to make him into a pleb so he could become tribune of the plebs. And his strategy for ruling, both when he had formal power and informal, was to just get street gangs together and run buck wild and terrorize everyone in Rome because they didn't have a police force. How is that any different than calls for Bog Beef linked me one today talking about police abolition? Pretty much the same situation, okay? The Cathar heresies in the Middle Ages. They had suspiciously familiar demands, for.
Is he woke on Sophie Lewis?
He's got to be. You know who Sophie Lewis is, right?
Can you jog my memory? I probably do.
She's the family, the gestators lady. She thinks that women having babies should be considered gestators, and it should
was she the person who's like abolished the family?
That's right.
Yes,
I saw her this. Right. She was everyone was talking about her this week, and I get. I mean, I feel like one of these people crops up like every 10 years, like the anti-family, like feminist.
Right. So there were so many Gnostic heresies in the Middle Ages and before that had these same demands. It just keeps cropping up in history over and over and over again. Maybe cyclical. It feels like there's this impulse in civilization for people to come along and say, hey, all that stuff that we're doing that makes this possible, we should get rid of it. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So getting rid of the classics department, going back and changing history, which is kind of one of the meta projects of the people who run the universities now, really gives you a leg up in that department, right? You don't have to ever talk about these. You don't have to ever talk about these uncomfortable things. You don't have to talk about why did the Roman Empire fall? What about all these weird free love heretical movements that were killed off by the Catholic Church?
I mean, I think the thing is that this is. I mean, there is a connection between Gnosticism. There is some connection. People, and if you read First Things magazine, they're kind of like this. They're a little bit normie-con, but they're an intellectually Catholic magazine, and the comparisons between progressivism and Gnosticism and Catharism are deep. This appears to be a sort of a mistake that where people just go like, I'm an idealist and this is how things should be, and now if the world doesn't conform to that, like I'm going to rebel against the human form itself and deny the next generation the right to live, and this is something that I'm going to I don't care what my body is, my spirit is thus, right? And you can see this in transgenderism, and you can see this in this antinatalism, and it always has the same form. I don't really think that. I think this might be a tendency in humanity or a tendency in Western civilization brought about by sort of cyclical evolution of authority structures. And I think I don't think necessarily that there's a direct connection of the Cathars and the Gnostics to our present crop of ideologically driven idealist feminists. I think that's a little bit of a larger stretch, I guess. But I think the thing is, I don't think this goes anywhere. I think that the woke left is doomed. They have a lot of money, so they're running hog wild. But I mean, we know that let's all become gestators, have no children, and cut off our genitals. I mean, this is not a self-sustaining human belief system, right? I mean, it
where are the shakers
right?
At, yeah.
These guys have shakers written all over them, right? And there is, in what, as Moldbug discussed, there is a common, regardless of whether there's a common connection between the Cathars and the present progressive movement, there is certainly a common ancestor between the Shakers and our present progressive movement.
Oh yeah. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not. His opinions about how you can directly trace this, I don't even care about that. It is definitely something in human behavior, like you said. Maybe it's a civilization, maybe it's Western civilization. This keeps happening over and over and over again. But I don't remember any time where there were lots of Gnostic heresies in the first and second, third centuries, but they never took control of the Roman Empire. Mm. They weren't even in control of. They got
close. I mean, they definitely. They didn't take over like as much as our current crop of radicals has.
You might have the ear of the emperor, and then the emperor dies, and the difference to me seems to be, it would be almost as if Cathars took or Circumcellions or whatever took control of the papacy, and every cleric who was trained from then on out was trained in their theology. Now, this can't be a self-sustaining belief system for the reasons you laid out. But, I mean, it could go on for a long time if you have
And it can take the apparatus down with it, which is the more worrying thing.
There's been pretty decent lasting empires that you had. These people, they're not the absolute shot callers. They're the bureaucrats. And gelded bureaucrats is kind of trad.
Gelded bureaucrats.
Yes, but
well, I mean, I don't think it was quite. I mean, the bureaukrats that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm just joking.
Right now, I mean, they're trying to geld everyone else.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the Heaven's Gate of self-gelding experiments where this is not simply a will for self-destruction. It's a will for collective self-destruction on a much broader scale.
Sometimes literally.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I don't know what to make of this. They've obtained so much power, and it's hard to really discern the true believers from the people who think they can cynically benefit from this. Because I imagine that a fair amount of their support, especially among woke capital, goes like, okay, when this apparatus kills itself, we'll be able to operate, our plans for techno-dominance with a lot less harassment. A peoples who think that a key rite of passage is to chemically castrate your child. They're not going to be really looking into, why there aren't going to be any jobs in 25 years.
Well, I mean, if you talk to feminists and shit privately, like 90% of them are TERFs privately, but there's blocking battalions.
They're cowards. Yeah, most feminists are TERF. Most feminists are TERF cowards. If you polled them 10 years ago, they would have uniformly given you TERF answers to questions, or given you answers to questions that at this point would be considered out of reasonable consideration because they're TERF talking points. But because they're cowards, they immediately fold.
Why did this accelerate so fast? Like it seemed like only a few years ago, you put out a video about this sexual revolution, and I would recommend anybody listening to this take a look at Distributist YouTube channel, and he had a series had featured ContraPoints. It was about the sexual revolution and some of the outcomes. That almost seems at this point like the things that were in that almost seem funny. We didn't see the child drag show thing. Like it started out as there was one kid who was like, he's a child drag queen. Yeah. I think they had a reality TV show last year that featured like 3 of them or something. This seemed like this really came blasted out of the gate in like 2012, 13.
Oh, it's definitely 12. It's 2012, 13. You got the dates on the nail. That is the date of the Great Awakening, right? The question is, why did the Great Awakening happen? I think there's a lot of answers to this question, and it's all the same phenomenon. The first one is Barack Obama won a re-election campaign on culture war issues and decided to double down on them. That's like the superficial, boring reason.
Yeah.
So that accelerated things. The second thing is that, and subsequently the Democrats began to believe that they could start winning on demographics. The Democrats no longer had to sell healthcare to the American people broadly, because it was clear that Obamacare was going to collapse and something needed to replace it. And what, are you going to replace it with a less generous system? Oh, come on, right? Of course you're not. So there's sort of that. Yeah, there's that kind of raw political reality. But I think that sort of masks 2 other phenomenon that happened that are a little bit more behind the scenes, but probably in the long term we're going to happen. But the sort of short-term political things were the catalyst for them actually coming to terms. The first thing is that the greatest generation and the silent generation died or retired out of leadership positions. That was the first thing that happened. And I think if you're like me, you believe that political bodies are only as powerful as the strongest leader inside of them. And having a huge generation of leaders shift out of power creates sea changes that then can be kind of instantly come to the surface when a political event like the re-election of Barack Obama happens. The second thing that occurred was that in 2012, it was obvious that gay marriage was going to win. Obvious to everyone who was watching this, and it was no longer a question. And I think with gay marriage, what was apparent at that stage was that the culture war was a moving target. And while gay marriage obtained its victory, Barack Obama also opened up sort of the religious liberty front of the battle, so that gay marriage wasn't legal. But this is where in 2012 you had, 2011 I should say, that's when you started to see the bake the cake bigot issues. That's where you started to see the, we're going to make nuns pay for birth control, even though this is a minuscule payment that the federal government could easily cover. The Democrats did not largely suffer from that, and they did not suffer any optical removal. So it became clear that civil rights was a moving target. Have you read, what is that? Age of Entitlement? Is it Christopher Caldwell?
Yeah, Caldwell. I haven't read it yet, but we talked about it a little bit last week.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a good book. I highly recommend it. Again, a little bit goes halfway. Mentions Moldbug compared it to Pickett's Charge. It's like, Pickett's Charge actually gets through, but it doesn't get through strong enough to really make the point it needs to, or to really win the battle. Maybe that's a LARPy thing, but the relevant quote from Age of Entitlement is this. There was a realization in 2012 that civil rights was not something that occurred in the 60s and then finished, and simply needed a completion step. It was a continuously moving target. The second thing people realized were that once an issue was identified as a civil rights issue, it would win 100% of the time, and that anybody who was on the wrong side of that issue would be punished. And so the subsequent question that Moldbug asked and pointed out, but that I think subconsciously everyone in positions of power asked themselves, was this. If you're a young, ambitious guy who just wants to be on the winning side of issues, what side do you choose? The woke side. And if you don't, you're either principled or stupid, right? You're either brave or you're a fool. Because the winning side is going to be always civil rights, and the civil rights language is always going to be with the woke. And because of that, everybody who is interested in just towing the line, getting ahead, immediately flipped over to the woke side of the arguments. And then it just accelerated. You could see the inductive order of operations go down the line. The dominoes kept on falling. And that's what kind of led to the situation that we have. Once the civil rights issue reared its head, it instantly won because no one wanted to stand in the way of it. Because if you stood in the way of a civil rights issue and it won, which it inevitably would, you would be punished. So there was essentially no one to actually say, okay, no, you're not going any further to the left. You're going to wait for 10 years. No, it just kept on going. The logic of civil rights kept on advancing. And that's what we really have before us. We have before us an eternal revolution of civil rights. And I might make a video on this idea of a perpetual revolution, before I make the video on distributism, because that's a much longer affair. But this is something that, it really is unsustainable, and it's leading to the sort of clown world scenario that we find ourselves in today.
That or, leaded paint.
Well, I don't know. Lead paint explanations were the darling of people in the 90s because we got rid of lead paint in the 80s. So it's still possible to believe that some people might have gotten lead paint. But these days, I'm not so sure. I mean, if you're a Zoomer, you can't use lead paint as an excuse, and I'm not going to let you use lead paint.
It's going to be interesting to see what excuse they come up for in like 20 years when we have another one of these situations where we're looking at a resurgence of violent crimes.
I don't know, eating Tide Pods, maybe. That's my one.
Is permanent revolution basically a way so that you never have to take authority and say, yes, I'm running this?
And that's exactly the thing, right? Precisely. You've hit the nail on the head. And this is exactly, I'm kind of showing my hand about a video idea I have. I get my video productions slow down to molasses in the wake of my hiatus, but I'm still kind of working on them whenever I have a few spare minutes. But the perpetual revolution is a Trotskyist idea. And the problem is that, if you take revolution seriously and you have a perpetual revolution, there's two ways it ends, right? Or there's only one way it ends, and it ends the way it ended for Trotsky with you dead with a big piece of sporting gear coming out of your skull. That's how it ended for Trotsky, and that's how eventually you're on the wrong side of the revolution. So it's the only way that perpetual revolutions can ever occur is when an elite sits above them and goes like, okay guys, we know who's going to win, so you're going to do your little song and dance and pretend to fight, and then we're going to come back and declare you the winners, right? It's going to go over and over and over and over again. It's what I call the Power Rangers revolution. You ever watch Power Rangers? I mean, I'm a 90s kid, so I do. Maybe you're younger than me. But you know the concept of the show, right? Like, you're following me, right?
Yeah.
It's like Voltron, but
but that's not really what it's robots. It's Japanese robots fighting big rubbery kaiju monsters. That's not really what I'm pointing at. It's the structure of the show. The structure of the show is that every day there's a new monster that's going to destroy the Earth, and the Power Rangers are always the underdogs, yet they always and every day win. Yeah. So what do you call underdogs that win every single day forever? Overdogs, right? Obviously, right? So if you were an alien,
history.
Yeah, exactly. So if you were an alien and you came down, you're like, okay, so like, wait, what? Let me get this straight. Rita Repulsa is the more powerful body, but she loses every time. The conclusion you'd come using Mulbuggian or Machiavellian analysis was that Zordon was the ruler of Earth, and he was in league with Rita Repulsa to concoct this toy fight to justify the narrative of why the Power Rangers were always and forever winning. And so what we have is a perpetual revolution in the Trotskyist sense that is sort of fake. It's a fake revolution because we know in advance who the winners are going to be. The winners are going to be the woke side, but they are always and forever going to be represented by the same lawyers, by the same firms, and by the same beneficiaries that make up the academy, the financial industry, the media, and the lower levels of the government that aren't elected, and the judiciary for the most part. This is sort of the fate that we're moving towards. And I think if the class reductionists or the true believer Marxists are going to take this on, they're going to have a lot more pushback than they're expecting. And that's the fate of every Angela Nagel that kind of comes about. They always get canceled, right? Because for the first time, they push back against the actual cathedral, against actual power. And it's not fun to be a rebel against actual power.
Absolutely not.
Most of the time, it's an accident, I think, because
Yeah.
they know where the lines are painted. If you talk to people like he said, you talk to people in private, you'll find out that what parts they believe and what parts they don't.
Yeah.
And for some of them, this is the problem with what Bog Beef calls the secret memo problem. Whereas if your pedagogy is teaching people things, but really there's a secret memo saying, hey, just ignore this. This is the real deal. Over time, like you're Xeroxing a copy of something, you're Xeroxing that copy, there's a breakdown in the communication, and some people will start to believe the fake story, and they didn't read the secret memo. And so you'll have the open conflicts with people who, a lot of these people are tenured university professors who are fighting with other tenured university professors. And I think that's that's just a communication breakdown. I don't think a lot of them wanted to be in that position. Do you think Angela Nagel, when she started out, knew that she was going to get this reaction?
Oh, absolutely not, right?
Yeah.
I think that she was an idealist who fell backwards into this position that she is in now, which is quite an unenviable one because, I hate to say it, but Angela Nagel's only rational course is to become a reactionary socialist. That is the only option left open to her, is to become a far-right socialist. Which, I don't know. I mean, that's what, and if we're honest about, I am copy pasting this from Mulbug. If you honestly look at communism, it is an elitist project that operates in the name of workers. It is not an actual movement of workers. The movements of workers, they're not always right wing, but they have a tendency to be a little bit right wing. And I think that any genuine, serious movement of counter elitism in this country is going to have to come from or be allied with the right. And it's going to come from the left, and it's going to have to cross so many lines that are protected by the left that by the time it's done, it's going to be associated with the right, no matter what it does.
We have this little catchphrase on this podcast. It's called "You can't do both." There's the permanent left argument was, you know what? We don't have to choose between these economic reforms and the social stuff. You do. You can't do both because by design, the social stuff was created to make sure that you're not gonna ever actually accomplish the things that you're promising people because you
can't physically get a quorum. Because that shit is hilarious because we're talking about where it's not actually for workers. So Lenin and Stalin they both set up this. On the left, there's all these rumors of what the left and the right means. It was the left right side of the assembly in France and all this kind of thing.
That's the other video I'm working on, but go ahead.
Nice. In the Soviet Union, if you're Comrade Stalin, you can just make it up. You can just decide what it is, right? Yeah. So he said, well, so there's the center, and that's me because I'm Comrade Stalin. There's the left com, so that's the left communists. You'll see very, very many of those today. Those are the workers. Those are the urban workers. This is Russia. This is a very long time ago. There's not very many of them. There's very, very few. And over here on the right, and so is this all presented like, these are just like personalities, right? You need the right, you need the left, I'm the center, and we all just sort of hang together. The right com, like my best friend, one of my close associate, he's your right com guy. He's more of your kulak man. That's sort of
you can be a communist and a kulak. What a strange time to be alive.
Well, so the idea was like, they're a bit sympathetic to the kulaks and stuff, but they're all part of the family. Q 4 or 5 years, you'll see very, very many people today. This was all presented like these are all tenable positions.
Have you ever read John Reed's book?
No.
Well, so in his book, he's just fawning over how there's these bearded kulaks who are coming in to fight at the barricades. They're ready to take up arms against the Tsar for the revolution. It's like, you read that and you kind of wonder, how did that turn out for them?
Well, I mean, it's so important to understand that the communist and progressive movements are elitist movements that conscript workers. They are not movements of workers. And I'm not even so sure that movements of workers, qual workers, could ever really work. That just seems insane to me.
It puts things in a tough position because I would say the thing to add on that is that you can't go run to the Republican Party and then they're just going to fix things for you.
No. That's the worst thing you could do.
Right.
That's the political equivalent of drinking seawater to try to quench your thirst.
That seems to be the game. There's a certain amount. I don't know if that's not really as much the case anymore. But there's never been a problem by the elites of just having the Republicans as the slow down a little bit and the Democrats as the speed it up. But one side can fuck it all up and then the other side will get 20% more the next time. But you can't do. If there's a place to it's like that Robert Conquest third law. I learned that from you. That is some awesome shit. So like, I thought
the one about bureaucrats.
Yes, so I thought about that law a lot, and that's the one. Like you said, that's the one.
That's the one no one talks about.
Right. So
it's the most important one.
I was thinking about that, and so think about this. Let's see if this works. Okay, so let's say you're the CIA, right? You're this institution, and the CIA has all these ostensible goals. To bring on a CIA agent, I need to pick somebody and I need to pay them a certain amount of wage and they'll be a CIA agent and they'll work for me. And I can incentivize them, say like X%, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say there's a crazy Al-Qaeda terrorist or IRA guy or something. Now he's got some shit he could get done in the CIA that would be way better for him than just having a job. So the amount that he can be incentivized to infiltrate is always going to be more than like a hometown boy. because he's getting a bonus that you don't even know about. Where you see this is that wherever the place is you're supposed to run away to find your political savior, they feel that the academy knows. I mean, they know that too. That's the place they're going to go. This is why all the shit in Marxism that was based or whatever. Yeah, that's the shit that they applied the most attention to.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're saying that there's a brand of Marxists that tries to take Marxism in a right-wing direction?
No. I guess the harebrained thought I had was more of a mechanistic thing. Was that I think that Robert Conquest's third law is that you can never incentivize someone more than an infiltrator can be incentivized to take over.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, if you're operating against the cathedral, right?
I meant just like in a vacuum, basically. Like to take over anything. Like,
Well, I mean, if you're to borrow your example, if you're a CIA, you could pay a person more than Al-Qaeda can, right?
But if I'm an Al-Qaeda guy and I put on a disguise and I get that job, you can never make a normie want it as bad as I want it.
Oh, okay. You're saying, yeah, okay. The enemy who's trying to get into sabotage is always going to be much more motivated than the person just getting a paycheck.
You physically can't.
I guess that's sort of a corollary.
Yeah, I don't know. Just a wacko thing. We can move.
No, it makes sense. I have to think about the implications of that. But I mean, there are all. I guess I know this wasn't your point, but I think that the thing is that if you're going to oppose the cathedral, you're going to have mostly an organization of true believers. Once you get rid of the genuine bad actors and the wasters, the distant right wing and the anti-woke, I don't want to say left wing, but the anti-woke socialists are going to be genuine believers because there's no incentive to do this because the moneyed powers are totally against this thing. I guess there might be incentives because it looks cool. It looks cool to oppose power. So
it's true believers. I think there's also genuine curiosity. There's there's people that you end up down roads of thought where it's like, no, I am right. I read this, and I know you can say I have a little bit of that too, where you can say, well, look, you got to stop thinking like a lawyer. This is you just got to be brute force. These things aren't real. There's a certain amount of autism that some people have that you can't get past. But this leads me to a question I'd like to ask you is, do you think, so the cathedral has to do all this stuff to keep its coalition partners happy and it has to pay out coalition partners with high positions within the cathedral.
That's its weakness.
Could they dumb themselves down too much to operate?
Oh, yeah, I think that... I mean, the only reason why we're even having this conversation is because the cathedral is weakened. And it can't... I mean, it's not screwing over Middle America because it wants to. It's screwing over Middle America because the world it's promised obviously can't come about. And so someone has to take it up the ass. And it's not going to be any of their client groups that they need to actually pull in victories and pull the levers for them in times of need. It's going to have to be someone else.
Yeah, and you can... We've had this discussion before whenever woke people talk about, whiteness or white people. They're not talking about themselves. They're not talking about people who have PhDs, and they're talking about, people like us.
Yeah, they're talking... Well, the trick only works because it might include them, right?
Right.
The way the trick works is that whiteness does technically include them, but the way that whiteness plays out is that it's only ever theoretically applied to them, but it gets really the teeth come in when it comes to conservatives, Southerners, people that the cathedral does not like so much. That's how the trick works. If it was obvious that the people who use whiteness, it didn't apply to them, then immediately it would be exposed as the self-serving lie that it is. The lie works because whiteness keeps out middle Americans applying for positions at Yale. It does not stop woke white professors from advancing their career by preaching about how they want to murder whiteness.
Our friend who works in academia always has this pithy little thing she says. She'll know these professors who are like white men. Like they'll say, oh, we need to step aside and give a voice to these people of color and women, but they're not going to step aside personally. This is theoretically something that somebody else should do.
Theoretically, someone should do this, right? I mean, and usually it's not so much. I feel a little bit like a boomer saying this because this whole like you should step aside and give up your position. This is a Dinesh D'Souza talking point, but it's an important thing to realize just how large it goes. The game is played so that you can talk about giving up privilege while wielding power. That is, and it's an incredibly short-sighted, and the only reason why it works is because there are an enormous number of people who have absolutely no loyalty to their ethnic group or think that their ethnic group will perpetually be spared from having to take it in the pants from this process. I'm not going to comment on how those things divide up between specific ethnicities, but you get the idea, right? Either complete individualism on the part of some people, or people who feel like they're going to be spared from the whole process.
This is how there was an article that was written like 2 or 3 years ago, and it was about one of these people that are just like a little cow of Idpol, like I don't know, take your pick, like bell hooks or whatever, and they're like they put me in charge of this department here at whatever Columbia, Yale, whatever. I have this whole ethnic studies department, and all the power players in the English departments and all these places, they just totally ignore me. I'm just here as a medallion that they put on their neck once in a while when they need something. I'm just totally here as a token. They use me as a political piece. They don't really care. They don't listen to me in the meetings and stuff. And I'm not being included. She was absolutely right. Absolutely right. Do you think
is that still true? That might have been true 10, 15 years ago, but is it still?
Absolutely.
Are you sure? Think about how many stories we've heard about. We spent all day, instead of working at the university job, in some kind of workshop, and we had another meeting where talked about the dangers of insert whatever here instead of doing their job.
Okay. You know how famous and big Bell Hooks is.
Yeah.
Is her ideology is she a shot caller? Are people really using what she says to the level that she's respected?
Well, I mean, she's certainly highly cited. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because, to what extent do people in academia expect to get listened to, other than to get just awards and citations?
Could coalition partners say, you guys say all this stuff, but you're playing these games as we've described. You're not actually giving up power to us in certain ways or whatever. You still want to eat yours. You still get to eat yours, right?
I think they get these criticisms internally a lot. And they slowly have to give power over to these people like Bell Hooks. Mm-hmm. But this creates instabilities in the system because Bell Hooks is under the illusion that she's running a revolution. In reality, she's the beneficiary of an elite. And the thing is that the people like Bell Hooks, not really Bell Hooks, but the younger people, and we know the people who I'm talking about, right? These people up here, in academia having crazy theories all the time. They don't understand that they have to preserve the system, so they create all sorts of troubles for the mainstream that the mainstream can't see their way out of.
Right. The fanatics take over the place.
Yeah, this naturally happens, and eventually they'll drive it into the ground. I don't think that if the quote unquote white professoriate were in charge, they would be getting rid of classics. I think that this is a concession they had to make just so that their own narrative would be at all believable.
Absolutely, totally agree there.
And
you can see the incentive here. If you're somebody who's lower on the totem pole, you go, well, why are we spending money on Aristotle and Homer? Is this aren't these?
And if you're a 7-year-old Aristotle professor, I mean, you take a pension and a stipend, and you cash out. I mean, you already know Aristotle forwards and backwards, and no one's been really interested in this stuff for years. So you buy a house in Baja and a boat and just cut your losses. I mean, it's not a real big skin off your throat unless you're thinking about the person who comes after you, which of course everyone in that position has ceased to do.
This is something you really hit on a lot about people who just don't care about posterity whatsoever.
Oh yeah, that's the only way you can explain any of this.
That one debate you had with that guy where he just said that that changed us. Was
that even public debate?
I think you only had it up for a day or so.
You put it private, like it was the Faces of Death clip that was banned from television because
he
committed a murder.
Requested that I take it down or something.
Yeah, I bet he did.
Okay, but it's true that a lot of people, you assume that we're all kind of operating on the same moral basis,
but we're not. Yeah.
I don't think that Jared Holt gives a fuck about people like Jared Holt who come after Jared Holt. Like, his assumption is that he'll be the last of the kind of people who he is.
Okay, look at someone like Nick Land. He shares a lot of the ideology with all these people you've been talking about, but he would seem happy to have everything destroyed. But I don't really think he does. I think he's angry.
Well, I don't want to get into. I mean, there are men who just like, okay, fuck it, right? Like, and I don't know Nick Land well enough. I think I've read one of his essays. And so I don't want to go on to be like, oh, yeah, this is what Nick Land thinks, and he couldn't possibly be a nihilist. No, if anyone's going to be a nihilist, I imagine it's Nick Land. But I guess that shows you that, Nick Land is someone who observationally agrees with the right wing in the critical dimensions, but he doesn't have right-wing values.
He's like a... Yes. I'm not saying all right-wing people are white supremacists, but just for a point here, he's like a white supremacist that hates white people.
Yeah. well, he's like... and I guess, isn't that just JF Gary Epi?
Yeah. Because I remember I pitched to him one time. I pitched gender acceleration to him once. I was like, how is this a problem for you? First off, you invented this accelerationism, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, so what would be the issue with everybody should just declare that they're black, they're a woman, they're non-binary, just whatever it takes to get the job. Just say you're anything. Mm-hmm. He was horrified. And he's always constantly like you'll see these stories like the child drag queen or whatever, and he's angry, he's disgusted, and then he says, good, burn it all down, good, fuck it. But if that was really how he felt, he'd be celebrating.
Yeah, you're right. He's angry. This is him lashing out when he says that. But now the not to pick on this guy that Dave bodied. That guy, you could tell by the conversation. This guy, I believe him when he said, like, oh, yeah, I don't think about posterity.
I mean, I don't want to use the word bug man, but when I say bug man, I think of, like, that. Like, who the fuck cares about the people who come after me? Like, I'm here with my, like, high fructose corn syrup, fantasy entertainment, and moral, righteous, atheist, progressive position. And after me, like, the human race can just fuck off. Pardon me, I didn't mean to swear, but you can bleep that out or whatever.
Yeah, so when I as soon as I die, the lights turn off.
Yeah, precisely.
You were earlier talking about the Enlightenment, and I don't like going all the way back there for the exact reasons that you said. I'm an American. I was raised with the American liberal values. To me, I can't imagine living in a place where we don't have those values. Now, whether or not they can still function in the 21st century is another thing. But there's a problem with materialism inherently. It's that you reach a stage where you can work yourself into just not caring about what happens as soon as you're gone. Because why should you? If you don't have religion, if you don't have children, there's what reason is there for somebody like that to give a crap about what happens the second that he stops breathing?
Yeah, and that's sort of the fundamental question that kind of comes down. And I think I don't know how this question has been put off so much. This is sort of it's kind of always wonders to me, like how have we created a generation where sort of the fundamental beliefs of thinking beyond yourself are almost looked down upon by a not insignificant number of young men who are highly educated.
I can tell you what the left would say. So you'd have two things. Number one, you'd get what about
climate change?
What about climate change? And number two, you'd get here's a quote from
what is, I mean, like, let's, before you go on, or do you want to unpack? Okay, how about I'll let you go and then we'll unpack each in turn, I guess.
Yeah, I don't. We're woke on climate change, but still, other people may want to hear. I'm going to quote another podcast here. The goal of leftism is to redistribute the ill-gotten gains of the first world to the third.
Well, that's the sum total of the goal.
Well, I think that you get the thing. Well, you guys deserve it. People they don't mean that. Well, when I die, nothing really matters anymore. They mean they always, whenever you talk to these people, they always say capitalism and patriarchy are hand in hand, right? Because it only works if the male son inherits the money and stuff. And so we're all gelded. We're so I can live a nice life.
Yeah, a eunuch can live it up, right?
Yeah, I can party.
But it's only a eunuch doesn't have to worry about inheritance tax, right?
Yeah, but I'm without blame because I'm toast once I croak.
This is why climate change, I'm not talking about the science of it, whatever, but as a political subject is brilliant because on the surface you're saying, I care very deeply about humanity and the world and what's going to happen 1,000 years from now. But in reality, it's the exact opposite. This is licensed to just not give a shit about anything because the world's going to catch on fire. It's all, the Etch-a-Sketch is going to get shaken up and nothing matters in the end.
I mean, climate change, I mean, I'm woke, whatever that means, in climate change too, I guess. I mean, I had this period in my life, I think it was around 2009, where I was just like consuming climate science papers. And my main concern was that like the carbon sensitivity factor for the Earth's climate was being overestimated by the IPCC. If you looked at published papers, and I just talk your ear off about this, but then the IPCC adjusted it downward a year, and the climate activists issued the same apocalyptic predictions, and the conversation didn't change at all. I find if people want to pull out the stops and go to 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, I'm fine with that. I don't have anything morally that opposes that, and if that's what it takes to save the next generation, I will absolutely do that by any means necessary. I just to say the climate change project as it's existing right now is transparently a vehicle for woke progressivism to get exactly what it wants and get nothing of what it doesn't. Just attempts to ever use climate change to question any of the things woke progressives like, and you'll immediately get shut down. There is no conversation where like mass immigration's carbon footprint ever gets called into question.
I mean, the cat was out of the bag when the Green New Deal was proposed, right?
Yeah.
It almost explicitly said that, hey, you have to do all these things that we've wanted to do, and the reason is this new threat. Yeah,
I mean, it's not in good faith, and it never was, even if it is accurate.
They couldn't even lie to us about it.
If Bernard Sanders couldn't even throw in like, what, we need to build some more nuclear plants. I mean,
that's a quintessential example, right? Like James Hansen, who's the father of climate science, he was the one that originally came up with sort of the Mount Pinatubo, adjustments, and then extended that to global warming. He was a huge advocate for mass expansion in nuclear. I think he still is. You're not going to find that on any activist climate change.
No, it's all.
You're not. It's because it's not what the woke cathedral wants.
To some extent, there's some right wing people talked about the kind of moves you would really have to make. It would be reactionary Christmas if your goal was to just drop the temperature.
Yeah, it would be like, okay, like I want the military to like shut down all international trade, shut down everything. Like everyone's under a curfew now. All non-essential entertainment's now terminated and under the management of the United States military. And we're going to go into negotiations with other countries in which we will threaten to ravage their economy if they don't do similar things.
Hell yeah.
Congratulations, buddies. We're on the way to 350 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere. Like, that's like, and it would work, right? And we're going to build all nuclear. We're shutting down everything else. And all non-discretional consumption is now terminated. Like, that would work. And it would be totally right-wing, and the left will never entertain that.
Yeah, you can't separate the struggle for life on Earth with giant boats of cheap shit from China.
You can if you're the left, right? Because they control the narrative, right? And this is why culture matters, right? Like you think that you understand the logic of climate change, and therefore you think you have the ability to kind of like get on the right side of it, but you don't. Because the winners and losers of climate change are already determined before the conversation and analysis even begins. And the losers are middle-class people from the West. And perhaps eventually middle-class people from Asia. The winners are bureaucrats in the West, the rulers in the West, and then maybe some of that victory cash and activists obviously are going to win. The people who actually advocate for this stuff are going to get a nice big paycheck. And then maybe kind of sort of the poor of the third world might get they might get a boondoggle here or there, right? But really any benefit the third world poor see from this is really going to be very incidental.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the supply of junk from China, and we're seeing another gift of that right this very moment. This shouldn't have been a surprise, because historically, when you had a vast trade empire, which is essentially now worldwide, you have the exchange of lovely diseases.
That's the coronavirus thing. Probably we could end here, I guess, because I think we've come full circle or whatever. I think obviously people know I live kind of like in the ground zero of where apparently coronavirus started in North America, which is scary. But the young people here are very worried about it. The old people aren't. But I think well, go ahead.
I love boomers. Before I came on, I saw James Woods, one of the classic MAGA boomers. He was like, "Oh, this is a bunch of bullshit." He posted a meme of a woman in what's the full Muslim burqa? Yeah, and she couldn't see anything because she was wearing the surgical mask. And just boom right out.
That might be the most boomer thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, can you get like Islamophobia and the hatred of the hijab into it?
Yeah. They don't give a fuck.
Maybe Adolf Hitler,
Yeah, and this is supposed to be. This has got his name on it. You're like a 78-year-old ex-smoker, but buddy, like this is supposed to be for you.
Well,
they don't give a fuck.
I got a theory about this. So when it first made landfall in America, my first thought was, well, the media is going to go buck wild with this because they love sensationalizing stuff, and young people do too, because and a lot of young people now are kind of rooting for apocalypse, because for one thing, they just don't have as much to look forward to. Whereas if you're a boomer, you're kind of on where our government and Wall Street is at, which is where you don't want people to quote unquote panic. You want the markets to keep going. You don't want supply disruptions. You want to keep things, running smoothly for the near future. Maybe in the long term it's going to fuck everything up. But hey, you're James Woods. You're 78 years old. What do you care?
No, absolutely.
Should we even be talking about this? Isn't this racist to talk about this?
Well, I think with the coronavirus now, it's just how our leaders reacted to this, right? They scoffed at the Chinese for not quarantining, and then they turn around. They scoffed at the Chinese for being late to quarantine and late to respond to the virus, when it was very difficult for the Chinese government to respond to it. And then even when they had months and months and months more advance notice than the Chinese government did, they did absolutely nothing to international transport to protect people in North America. Now, I understand coronavirus, all it is a worse flu, which means it has a marginally higher death rate. But, still, what if this was significantly worse, right? I feel like the response wouldn't have been that much different.
No, it wouldn't have been.
No.
These are decisions that were made a long time ago.
Yeah, the decision was that we never mess with international transport because we're afraid of our interests. And of course, that couldn't possibly be the real reason, because now as soon as the virus made landfall, the Dow and the stock market's tanking because everyone's panicking. So they lost whatever money they would have lost from doing a controlled travel restriction earlier. But it's about the narrative. It's about the narrative of how dependent we are on international trade and supply chains. And in order to protect that narrative, they're willing to let, a certain number of older people and more vulnerable individuals die. And I think that's really, really scary. I don't know what to say, and I guess it's these little things that creep you out, and that really make you have to be a right winger. It doesn't matter how much you want healthcare to be socialized, or how much you understand how the free market has these horrible flaws, or maybe even you think that Karl Marx has a good point about something Hegelian dialectic or whatever, right? Like, that's not the point. The point is that the left wing is in a position where it's just really courting these frankly insane moral propositions and these sane reactions to what would, in ordinary operating political conditions for human societies, be really no-brainer results. Yes, the life of our children and our old people take prioritization over, free travel. Yes, the posterity of the next generation is more valuable than, enacting some historical third world vengeance fantasy so you can be a white savior. And your children matter more than your ability to have a free life. This is insanity, and the realization of this as insanity, I think, is a more pertinent designator of you as right wing than anything else, really. This might be a stopping point because I have to go in a few minutes.
That's perfect. Thanks, Dave. This was awesome. Everybody should go to YouTube, check out the Distributist.
Thanks so much. Hopefully, I'll have a little bit more time to make a video in the next 2 weeks, but we'll see how it goes. It's touch and go for me at the moment. But thanks so much for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Nice to have you.